know you guys need a bridge. I'm going to wire you guys $5 million on Thursday. Threw himself a birthday party in San Francisco, and then was flying himself and his best friend up to his vineyard in Northern California for dinner with the family, and crashed the plane and died. In that one moment, all of a sudden everything changed. And a lot of the existing investors that we had were because of this lead investor. He had brought a lot of those relationships. And so when he was out, they were all kind of like without a leader. They'd just been kind of going along with him. And so it was hard for all of us, and on a personal level.
I can't even imagine. Everybody's so optimistic. They never ask what's the worst thing that can happen. And so if you were to give advice from what I'm hearing, it's have a backup, whether for its investor, even for your employees, your key A players, and then a backup, and then another backup upon a backup. Would you agree with that?
Failure comes from the failure to imagine failure. Just last week, I sat my team down and I put up a tombstone on the TV. I put the name of our company. I put 2025 dash, and then I left the second year blank. And I made our team write the obituary for our company. And everybody had to go around and read how long did the company last. And then the explanation of why we died, what was our legacy, who misses us, and how could we have survived longer.
I love the tombstone analogy or exercise, because a lot of people are just like, well, let's do a SWOT analysis, right? It's so corporate. Let's get down into the weeds. Let's, cycle back on that, like all those different memes. But yeah, the other thing is when you're talking even about yourself, right? They say for, trying to find your why, I recommend for those listeners who've never done this, seriously, write your obituary. It is one of the most profound things and emotional things you can ever do. But to translate that to a company, I think is very profound too, especially when you're trying to build for an exit. I love teaching, and I feel like we're doing a masterclass here. We've got a guy here, Andy, who has been on 3 rocket ships. He's got a ton of experience, and the best experience, of course, is founding and then having to shut down a company. When that changes, you're going to pivot. Have there been any pivots so far in the journey?
Yeah, the speed with which the technology world is changing. We're a 10-month-old company. From founding the company, in April of last year to now March of this year, right? Just stepping into.
I'm Garrett Wong, and this is the Investing to Win podcast. How do you define success, and what does winning look like for you? Andy, you lost your biggest investor in a plane crash. What happened, and how did you keep going?
It was one of the craziest days of my career. And it was a Monday, and our chairman of our board and our largest investor had thrown himself a birthday party in San Francisco. And it was 68 years old, gregarious investor, legend in Silicon Valley, had been invested since the 70s, and was on his last fund, and was all in on my company, and had said, I know you guys need a bridge. I'm going to wire you guys $5 million on Thursday. But have my birthday party Monday, recover, and then we'll get to work. And this was the first Monday of 2019. And he threw himself a birthday party in San Francisco, and then was flying himself and his best friend up to his vineyard in Northern California for dinner with the family, and crashed the plane and died. And we not only lost kind of our third co-founder, right? Because he was there, he was the first money in. He was really supportive. But we also, we needed that bridge that he was gonna send to us. And we had been hiring, we'd been building, our monthly burn with that expectation. And we had not been talking to other investors. And that was, in hindsight, we really did have all of our eggs in one basket with our existing investor base. We're like, they were super supportive, and they said, we're gonna back you. But then in that one moment, all of a sudden everything changed. And a lot of the existing investors that we had were because of this lead investor, right? He had brought a lot of those relationships. And so when he was out, they were all kind of like without a leader, right? They've just been kind of going along with him. And so it was hard for all of us, and, on a personal level. But then, especially, from a business level, like, we had to make payroll, and we ended up not making payroll, in a few months after that, because we were missing that investment. And so, 2019 was a very pivotal year for us. I put way too much of my own money in. My co-founder put way too much of his own money in, just trying to keep it all together. We did survive, but we took pretty harsh terms from some other investors who swooped in with a premium on what they expected from us, and we said, well, at least we survived 2019. 2020 is going to be our year.
Yeah.
And then this whole pandemic thing happened, and unfortunately that just compounded the challenges.
Boy, what a story. Yeah, no, when I was doing my research on you and I saw that, I mean, I've had my own pivots. I think everybody has those defining moments a lot. A lot of that is what I like to explore on investing to win. And so obviously it's awful for just losing probably a friend and a mentor. Obviously an
Mhm.
investor like that doesn't come in just from that. And then you have to have the uncomfortable conversations very shortly after. What the heck are we going to do?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I can't even imagine. So what were if you were to say the top three lessons from that experience in terms of hindsight, right?
Yeah.
What would you say those would be?
Always be talking to people outside of your network. Never stop growing your network.
Hmm.
No matter how confident you feel around your network, no matter how confident you feel about the people that are, you know, in in your camp. There's certain roles that you do need to know what you would do if that person was no longer a part of the team, if for whatever reason you lost your CTO, right? If you lost your lead investor, right? And we were frankly just caught flat-footed, right? Because we've been just you know relying on our board, right? Our board said we got you, but then 40% of our cap table died in a plane crash. He was a single GP at that point, right? He bought out his other
Yeah.
partners. All the money reverted to the LPs as soon as he passed away, right? There was no contingency plan to continue what his intentions were,
Wow.
within the fund. So I think that was number one. Never stop growing your network. Number two, when everybody doubts you, you still have to believe in yourself. We had to have very hard conversations very quickly with a lot of our really really talented team members. But we raised our Series A. We were on our way to our Series B. We were going after pretty premium talent, and we've been able to steal a lot of really incredible team members. But we also found out that some of those team members were there for the paycheck, and when things got tough, they said, "Hey, you know what? No problem, good luck, I'm out." Right? Some people didn't even say good luck. Some people just said, "I'm out." If you miss this payroll, I'm not coming back to work. And as a young company, I think that we were playing a bigger game. And so, and I look, I fully appreciate that not everybody is built to take the risks that founders do, and not everybody is built to take risks of early stage companies. But the speed with which some employees left was a little bit jarring. But they did what they needed to do for them. But you know it's going to happen, and there's not that much margin for error. Once you get to a company of the size that we were,
Right.
and then I think that the resolve to keep fighting comes from being in love with the problem that you're trying to solve, not the solution that you've created or the company that you've built. And I think that was the thing that probably kept me in, and some might argue longer than I should have stayed, even through 2020 and the pandemic. Like, we were still fighting, we were still trying. We probably overcommitted, in some ways, maybe more than we should have. But the problem wasn't done, right? Like, there were families that we were serving, there was users that we had, there were clients that were still loving our product, even if we didn't have an investor group, or the same investor group to support us, and we had to go find new investors, and those new investors weren't quite as big of believers as the originals. We still thought that there was a problem to be solved. And so I think that was the underlying piece of the puzzle that for me, if it had been trying to make it easier to post on social media, I probably would have quit. Like, I probably would have quit sooner. But because we were actually dealing with helping families be able to afford groceries, like real problems with real families, where we got to
Hmm.
know our
Hmm.
users, and they were families just like the one that I grew up in. So I knew how important it was, for those reasons. I think that's probably what kept me in as long as I stayed, even though eventually the company, went out of business. Probably the resolve to keep working as hard as I did, even when a tragic thing had happened, was really around that idea.
Wow. I'm going to have you repeat that last one because I've never had a guest I've never actually heard that phrase. So you want to be in love with the problem,
Mhm.
not the company itself, or what? Can you say it
Yeah,
again?
yeah. You want to be in. in love with solving the problem,
Okay.
not with the solution that you've created. And the way that I think about this is there was a talk that was given by the CEO of Malaria No More, a nonprofit that helped get mosquito nets to people in Africa.
Okay.
And he said, and I always remember it, it's really stuck with me, that if you're the leader of a nonprofit and you don't know how to put yourself out of business, then you're in love with your organization, not with the solution that you're trying to create. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
wants there to be cancer nonprofits because nobody wants cancer to exist, right? Nobody wants there to be hunger nonprofits. Like if food banks went away, that would be amazing because it
Yeah.
would mean that there wasn't food insecurity. Like those are things that should be built to disappear at some point, right? And I think that same thing with a startup. Like your goal is to build something that creates a way for a problem to go away, and you bob and weave as much as you need to roll with the new things that happen, roll with the new technologies that exist, roll with the new opportunities to eradicate the problem that you're trying to solve and to be the solution. And you will quit if you're just in love with a piece of technology that you created that does a thing.
Mm.
But if that problem, if you still know somebody who has the problem that you're trying to create a solution for, if that problem still exists for somebody, you're not done. And I think that's a perspective that's been helpful for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I look at different industries in healthcare and wellness. Let's just take a physiotherapist as an example. It's fascinating because, you know, you could have either a large clinic with a bunch of operators or just whether you're a single operator, it doesn't matter. The point is, when you fix your client, they don't need you anymore. And so you constantly have to farm, and like it's not like you can have, well, I guess you could maybe invent some kind of reoccurring, physiotherapy program, but just
Sure.
take anything where you're healing somebody and truly helping them
Mhm.
and they
Yeah.
never need your service again.
Yeah.
Right. But what you're talking about, I think there is passion.
Yeah.
Um, just back up for just a slight second there, because, when we're talking about succession planning, and I think a lot of people in business, really, whether it's partnerships or groups like yourself, like they're in love with the solving the problem, that's for sure, but everybody's so optimistic, they never ask what's the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah.
And so if you were to give advice, from what I'm hearing, it's have a backup, whether for its investor, even for your employees, your key A players, and then a
Mhm.
backup, and then another backup upon a backup. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. The one of my favorite investors, Josh Wolf from Lux Capital, has a saying that I think about a lot, which is failure comes from the failure to imagine failure.
Okay. Wow. This is going to be
Failure
tons of
comes
zingers you're giving me here, Andy. I
from
love it.
the failure to imagine failure. And just last week, I sat my team down and I put up a tombstone on the TV, and I put the name of our company, and I put 2025 dash, and then I left the second
Sure.
year blank,
Yeah.
and I made our team write the obituary for our company, and everybody had to go around and read "Here lies Stretch," which was around from 2025 to, and then they filled in the blank. How long did the company last?
Yeah.
And then the explanation of why we died. What was our legacy? Who misses us?
Yeah.
And how could we have survived longer? And I gotta tell you, like seeing my company name on a tombstone was pretty jarring for me, even though I was the one who did it. But when I was an executive coach, I used to do that, in offsites that I would lead for other companies,
Hmm.
and it's incredible to see all the different ways that your team can imagine failure. And it's sometimes it's like just wide open, like things you maybe have never thought of, but like from their point of view, right? They're your go-to-market team member,
Hmm.
junior team member, and they're seeing something that you're not, and they're like, that's a point of failure that could kill this company, right? And all of a sudden it surfaces. And so I think that that's something that I, I get paid to have that point of view, by being the founder and CEO. But like I want those pieces of input because people see things differently than what I see from their vantage point within the company.
Yeah, I love the tombstone analogy or exercise because a lot of people are just like, well, let's do a SWOT analysis, right? It's so
Yeah.
corporate. Let's get down into the weeds. Let's cycle back on that, like all those different memes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the other thing is when you're talking even about yourself, right? They say for trying to find your why, and I recommend for those listeners who've never done this, seriously, write your obituary. It is one of the most profound things and emotional things you can ever do. Go take a pen and a paper, a notebook, go into a dark room, play some light music, and just write your obituary of what you wanted everybody to say at your funeral, what you wanted to mean to everybody. But to translate that to a company, I think is very profound too, especially when you trying to build for an exit. Um, all right. So you mentioned there was a company failure here. Let's go all the way back. Can you give us a bit about your background and how you started? Even go back early if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm the oldest of four. So I have been told that I have big brother energy. But like, I try to make sure that it's like the big brother that you would want to have energy.
Yeah,
Like
not the
I'll,
bully big brother.
yeah,
Yeah,
not the bully. Like I'll help you get things off the top shelf. I'll give you a boost over the fence. And I think that what really shaped a lot of how I moved through the world. Was doing I love my siblings, and I'm really grateful that I was the oldest of the four of us. But my parents were incredibly social people. Our house was the Super Bowl house, right? Our house was the hangout house. Like we were always had if it was like, hey, we should all get together. Yeah, we're gonna go to the Elwood's house, right? My mom, was best cook ever, and always had, she's famous for her chocolate chip cookies, and very social. My parents, led small groups at our church, and so like we were always, in the mix, planning things, organizing things, convening groups of people together, and that really shaped a lot of about how I think I moved through the world today. But we were also like I didn't know how month to month we were growing up. Like my parents never, I never worried that we weren't going to be able to pay rent or have food next month. But in hindsight, like there are times where like I know that my parents were struggling more than they let on, and so I think that some of that is really what triggered maybe the entrepreneurial bug in me.
Mhm.
Neither of my parents, are entrepreneurial, and they sometimes have looked at me and been like, "Where'd you come from?" But my $1 a month allowance when I was 12 was just not cutting it for me, and so I was like, I gotta figure out how to make money. And so at 12, I started my first company, a lawn mowing business. And in Texas, right, the grass starts growing, in February and keeps growing until like November. So it's
Mhm.
you got like 10 months, of making hay, while the sun shines. And I was homeschooled, and so my mom let me uh, create my own schedule as early as age 14. And so I would mow lawns in the morning, come home, shower, have lunch, and then I would start school. And so I had an advantage over all the other kids that were in the more
Yeah.
traditional school system. So 3 days a week, I was out, running my lawn mowing business. And I almost didn't go to college because I was making what most people make their first year out of college while I was still in high school with my lawn mowing business. In the late 90s, I was making like $30,000 a year in high school. And I figured out how much fun it is to build teams and to get into
Wow.
sales. And I just went door to door and would knock on doors and be like, "Hi, my name's Andy Elwood. I'm with Reliable Lawn Care. I'm going to be mowing your yard this summer. If you leave a $20 bill underneath your doormat every Wednesday, I'll be your yard will be mowed before you get home." And people were like, "You're going to mow my lawn?" I was like, "Well, it's hot. You don't want to do it." And they're like, "You're right." And so I just would, check underneath the mat. If there's a $20 bill there, we'd mow the lawn. And I just,
Presumptive sales. I love it.
just kind of canvass the neighborhood. Like I had like an old Mapsco, and I just like put
Yeah.
X's across. Like it was like, funnel management. Like I didn't know that's what it was, but like I learned a lot of that early on. But it also, it was great for me, talking to adults, as a kid, and just kind of like I bought a truck, when I turned 16 with all the cash that I'd saved up. And that allowed me to expand beyond the neighborhood and started to hire my younger brother and his friends to work for me. So went to college, studied finance, but continued to be pretty good at sales. and sold life insurance as my first job out of college. Which, if you haven't, spoken to a life insurance person, recently, like if you could sell life insurance, you can sell pretty much anything
Well,
else.
door-to-door
Like,
vacuum sales, right, is
I mean,
probably the second
exactly.
hardest thing that I'm thinking in my mind.
100%. But I was fortunate to get recruited from, being in financial sales to then go sell private jets for Warren Buffett. That was my second job out of
Yeah, I
school.
read about that. How does one go about and start selling private jets for Warren Buffett? Tell us.
Yeah, yeah. So Warren Buffett was the client of NetJets in '95. The
Oh,
company
right.
started. The company was started in '87. Warren Buffett became a client in 1995, bought the whole company in '96. So it became a Berkshire Hathaway company in '96. And one of the divisions of the company was called Marquee Jet, and it was a jet card, which you bought 25 hours of flight time at a time. It's kind of like a debit card. And so, from wheels up to wheels down, we would debit, 2 hours, 2.5 hours off of your card. And then whenever it was time to re-up, we just we'd sell you another 25 hours. And amazing way to spend my mid 20s. Cold calling celebrities, athletes, and billionaires, and they actually took my phone call. And they were like, "Oh my gosh, this is the guy who has access to Warren Buffett's private jet fleet. I would like to fly on those planes." And so I learned a ton. It was fun. I was in Dallas at this point. The Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Rangers. They were all my clients. And there were some celebrities who lived in the Dallas area for tax purposes, but it was actually the clients that no one had ever heard of that were the ones that I think I've learned the most from. They were titans of their industry, but they were in a very small specific industry, right? They were not famous, they were not in the Forbes magazine, but if you were in their industry, you'd heard of them because they were the best at what they did. And they were the ones who actually convinced me to quit being the sales guy. They said, "Look, Andy, it's exciting that you have all these amazing stories of celebrities and athletes, but like my limo driver has better stories. Like, quit limo driving your way through life.
Hmm.
If you want to get in the back of the plane, go take some risks, right? You'll never get there by being my sales guy." And I remember that conversation very clearly, with one of my bigger clients. And so I quit and joined a startup a year later. Moved to New York City and joined my first technology company. And that was a pretty pivotal moment in my life. Everything changed after that.
Okay. Wow. I love the grass cutting story, right? And how entrepreneurial you were. But then, yeah, you know what? I think Instagram is full of billionaires, right? With the rented Lambos and all these
100%.
things. And you were sort of living that lifestyle. But you started the pod talking about relationships, right? And there's one thing to be flashing a relationship shallowly on Instagram and posing versus actually contributing and bringing value to those relationships. Can you expand a little bit on what that moment was like and how you now think about relationships?
Yeah, people always say it's not what you know, but who you know, and I completely disagree. I think it's not who you know, it's who knows you.
Mm, mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
I knew Tony Romo, the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. He was my client. He flew on my plane. But if out of context, you said to Tony Romo, "Hey, you know Andy Elwood, right?" He would not know who Andy Elwood was.
Right.
Right? If you said Andy Elwood with Marquis Jet, maybe, right? But like I was his jet guy. I was not Andy, his friend, right?
Right.
And I think that was kind of a turning point for me. Was I want to be known, I don't want to know. And I think that making sure that I'm doing enough in relationships, make sure that I'm adding value enough to where people are like, "Oh yeah, no, I definitely know Andy," right? Is something that in the back of my head, I'm always kind of thinking about, right? Because for me, the greatest compliment that I could ever receive is a referral, right? Is someone saying, "I really think you should meet Andy, and here's why," right? And so I think that being able to be easily referred, right, easily introduced, and other people choosing to have their network generosity flow towards you is a really good litmus test of how you're moving through the world. Of people saying, "Oh my gosh, I really want to introduce you to this guy. His name's Andy. He lives in New York." And I'm grateful that that happens, right? That people are like, "Oh no, my buddy's traveling. He runs XYZ company or XYZ fund. He's going to be in New York City. Can I connect the two of you?" And it's like, yeah, absolutely, would love that. And I think that the successes that I've had in my life, is going from one good person to another, and having it feel organic, right? Having it feel like something that you would want to do. It's like, oh, I'd love to introduce you to Andy. That for me is kind of the pinnacle of success that I want to achieve.
Yeah, my business coach also says the exact same thing. When you walk into a room, how many people are going to know who you are, right? And I mean, obviously, you want to be in bigger and bigger rooms. Like, don't just go to
Yeah.
your local business club. Of course, they're going to know you, right? A room full of strangers. And, to your point, you're saying, referrals, but I think you said the buzzword introductions,
Mhm.
right? I think introductions is a better way of saying it than give me a referral. Who can I introduce you to? Who can you introduce me to? Because that's the basis of relationships. So let's move on to that next point. So you've got this company, and what happened? I mean, it sounded like everything was going great. You had, at the very end there, what was a pivotal point? What happened?
Yeah, well, so moved to New York City and had a couple of early successes that was a part of a company that sold to Facebook pre-IPO, which was good for us. It was better for investors, but it was good for us. And then ended up not taking the job offer at Facebook and going to help a small Israeli startup called Waze expand from Israel, and in the traffic and navigation app. We had 3 million
Yeah.
users when I
I've heard.
joined, and
Yeah.
ended up selling to Google for a little over $1 billion, because we grew to about 60 million users, in the short time that I was there. And so like learned a lot as a team member of two companies that were acquired, but then wanted to go build something myself, and so founded a company. It also got acquired, and so I was like, three for three, this is amazing. Like, startups are easy, but that was it was all pretty quick, like wins. I jumped on rocket ships, right?
Hmm.
Um, the company that ended up, our investor passed away. We were in our seventh year of building that company when everything went down, and we'd started with trying to build a smart grocery shopping list, and we said there's a source of truth for everything else we buy, but not for groceries. If I want to buy a house, I go to Zillow to see what my options are. If I want to buy a car, I can go to Auto Trader, or if I want to buy a flight, I can go to Expedia. And I'm willing to put my intent to purchase out there and have people show me what my offers, show me what the offers are. But for groceries, the thing that we buy most frequently, we just walk into a store and hope they carry what we're looking for, and hope they charge us a fair price. There's no way to compare one store to the next for our entire shopping list.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of the motivation for what would become basket.com. And it ended up working out pretty well. And we were moving quickly, we were growing, we had hundreds of thousands of families that we were helping. We were saving people hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars a year, just by using our free app. And so everything was pointed in the right direction. But where we got caught flat-footed when our investor passed away was we hadn't truly catalyzed the category of what we're building. If you were a shopper who was trying to save time and money, you knew about us, but investors didn't, right? And while we had turned on some revenue opportunities, we hadn't really publicized how great of a business we were building, and so that's when we got caught flat-footed, and needing to bring on capital, on unpleasant terms. And ultimately that's why the business ended up failing, and we had to shut it down after the pandemic. But it was, we learned a lot, but unfortunately, that business probably was just a little bit too early. And sometimes it's all about timing.
Well, timing. I mean, we talk about today. One of the things you had said was just trusting your board, and the I don't want to be political or anything, but the first person that came to my mind when you said trusting your board was Elon Musk, right? And the whole thing that's coming out now with OpenAI and everything else, and so those relationships and then moving on. So now this newest venture that you have, the one where you did the tombstone, tell us about that and what the big mission is.
Yeah. Yeah. So the new company I built is called Stretch, stretchgroceries.com, where you can, we're quietly live in the App Store if you search for Stretch Groceries. And what we are building is a continuation of what I tried to build with Basket previously. We're building a grocery intelligence platform that allows shoppers to know for this week's shopping list what stores carry all of your products and what is the total price for your entire shopping list at every local store on the platform. And so very simply, you show me this week's grocery list. We will digitize it, use a little bit of AI and some technology on the back end to go fetch all the prices for those items or similar items to allow for store brands or regional brands. And say, if you go to Walmart, it costs this much. You go to Target, it costs this much. If you go to Kroger, it costs this much. And then you can make that decision. Is it price that's more important to you? So turning left or turning right could save you $20, $50 every week. Or is it more of this trip it's about convenience? I want to go to the store that's closest to me to just grab these 7 items. I'm not gonna drive out of my way to save $3. Internally we call that proximity pricing preference, right? How far will you drive to save how much money? And even for people that are very, very budget conscious, right? Different times of day, different days of the week, or different scenarios, impact whether you're trying to save time or whether you're trying to save money. But Stretch exists to give agency to the shopper so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. There's lots and lots of technology that help retailers, that help the supply side optimize for pricing, optimize for packaging, optimize for inventory. But the demand side, the shopper side, has never had a technology stack, and we're trying to build the first piece of that through our simple free app that's now available for download.
And so the inherent differences between basket.com, which I believe was making grocery prices transparent, versus knowing your entire grocery list and where you can get it. You have this, I'll call it, I guess, a failure, because when you shut down a company, it's a failure. I don't want to be insensitive because I've lost companies too. What was the pivot point in, okay, now I'm just going to do this and I think this one's going to work?
Yeah. It took me a long time to get over, shutting Basket down. I'll just be honest.
I can't imagine.
It was pretty brutal. And but in that process, I worked with my executive coach, and we came up with 4 non-negotiables for what it would take for me to ever jump back into being a founder. Because like most people should never be a founder, right? Like you have to be crazy to be a founder. Like you should delay it as long as possible until you're driven mad by the problem that you see existing in the world, and it's literally driving you so crazy that you have to go try and create the solution.
It's an itch that you just can't scratch. Like it's just driving 100%. You nuts. Yeah, keeping 100%. You up at night. Yep.
And that's again why I say you have to fall in love with the problem, not the solution, right? Like the fact that problem still exists in this world, right? So for me, the fact that there is food insecurity in America because of inefficiencies that are embedded in the legacy industries of the grocery industry.
Mm-hmm.
Food doesn't have to cost this much.
Yeah, it does not.
The richest country in the history of the world. 17% of the shoppers that I interviewed last year had skipped a meal in the past month so that somebody else in their household didn't have to.
17%. Wow.
Like people are, and the craziest thing, we did a huge study last year, to inform the product and the way that we're, moving forward with what we're building. We asked people, how has your grocery shopping habits changed over the past 6 months? So this was last summer. So like in the first half of the year, did your grocery shopping habits change? And if so, in what way? The biggest change in grocery shopping habits came from upper middle class and upper class families. And it was very surprising to us. Like we were thinking blue collar and like lower middle class families would have been where like a lot of the changes had happened. But the more we dug into the data, what we realized was blue collar families and lower middle class families had already changed as much as they could. They'd already been making those edits and changes because
Yeah.
grocery prices are 25% higher than they were before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And now those prices are starting to affect upper middle class and upper class families that have previously been, price insensitive for groceries. And 84% of Americans, according to Consumer Reports, 84% of Americans are afraid they won't be able to buy groceries next month that they bought this the same way that they bought them this month. Right? 84% of people are knowing that they're going to have to trade down, they're going to have to buy less, they're going to have to, come up with different strategies. Their budget for food is the same, but they're getting less. Shrinkflation and all of the different ways in which food is too expensive. And if you think about it, there really isn't a source of accountability, right? Retailers are not, trying to figure out how to lower prices. Like the prices are up, they're going to stay up. And so part of what I hope that Stretch stands for is shoppers just knowing what their options are and being able to have the power that technology is now giving so that they can make the best choices for themselves, and they can vote with their checkbooks, like they can vote with their feet. And I think that's going to be, especially as we move into the future of agentic commerce, and we move into a future where, the walled gardens that used to be, the .coms for the retailers or the retailer apps become less and less of the destination, and more decisions are made, on recipe websites or with a smart grocery shopping list like Stretch, or inside of, your favorite AI interface. There's going to be changes that are necessary, and I believe that Stretch is going to be right in the middle of a lot of that.
I love teaching, and I feel like we're doing a masterclass here, Andy. Because so, audience, I want you to grab a pen and sort of. I hope you guys are taking notes, and those of you who are watching on YouTube here, just to catch this, because I mean, we've got a guy here, Andy, who has been on 3 rocket ships. He's got a ton of experience, and the best experience, of course, is founding and then having to shut down a company. Right? You know everything, and audience, I want you to hear. Like he's talking 17%, 84%. Like Andy knows his numbers. He knows his market. He's clearly done the research. He's trying to figure out exactly what his clients want and his core avatar. And I'm assuming, Andy, but you would know this, when that changes, you're going to pivot, right? Mm-hmm. Have there been any pivots so far in the journey?
Yeah. The speed with which the technology world is changing, we're a 10-month-old company, right? But from founding the company, in April of last year to now March of this year, right? Just stepping into the entire world has changed, right? Agentic commerce was not a phrase that people were using 11 months ago.
And AI is better today now than it was even a month ago.
Yep. Orders of magnitude better.
Yeah.
And, there is a lot of hype and there's a lot of noise in, technology and, all of the foundational models and the Anthropics versus OpenAIs versus Grok versus Gemini. Like, let all of them fight that out, right? They're all swappable.
Yeah.
In your solution.
Yeah.
You need an LLM of some kind, but like,
yes,
it's all said and done, like you're gonna figure out which one fits there, and
you'll plug in the proper one, and when that doesn't work, plug in another one. It's going to be there. Yeah.
Yep. Get your architecture correct.
Yeah.
Don't worry exactly about that piece. And I think that's what what we've spent a lot of time is thinking about. All right, where is AI best used, and where is it it's a nice to have, but there's other more traditional ways that you can do it. And maybe one day those traditional ways will be so much better that it makes sense to fully plug in AI, in those places. But I think that if you asked me a year ago, wow, are you building the next unicorn? I would have said absolutely. Where I'm sitting today, 1 year later, with everything that's coming and where technology is going, I gotta say, I think we're building a decacorn. Like, I think that we just have the opportunity is even bigger than it was a year later, And that's a really great feeling, right? To feel like you're skating not just to where the puck's going, but where all the pucks are going, right? Like, and there's two things that I know for sure. AI is going to change everything, and people are still going to feed their families. And if we can use the first to make the second that much better, then that's a really fun project to be working on.
It is. It is. And I love the, again, bigger picture purpose. You mentioned A players. You mentioned how fast people exited and left you, right? The betrayal, right? I could almost feel it in your words. The last segment here before we stop, I just wanted to talk about the concept of A players, how you attract them, how do you keep them with you. One of my mentors has, it's not an old concept, but just giving some of your core management or even the entire company, because everything, we're all building these companies for an exit, right? You've had so many exits already, like maybe the concept of B class shares or some kind of pool there. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I know in this world is that people do what they're incentivized to do. And if you don't understand how someone's behaving, it means you don't understand what they think their incentives are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that has helped me, in a lot of different circumstances to really just like press pause. Like, I don't understand why this person's behaving in this way. Like, what am I missing about the way that they're seeing the world? And right now is incredibly challenging to recruit A players. It's really, really hard.
I would
Um,
concur.
and I think that I was speaking with the CTO of a publicly traded company, and because they are tangentially in the world that I want to be in. And I said, if you were me and you were trying to recruit technical talent, what would your strategy be? He said, Andy, like, you're in a tough spot because it's never been easier to get a prototype built. It's never been easier to vibe code something over the weekend to show
Mm-hmm.
somebody your vision. And so you have two types of executives right now. You've got people that are going to be a founder of their own thing, and they're just biding their time until it's time to go do that thing. Or you have people that are letting themselves be money whipped into huge positions at the big companies that everybody's heard of.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know, if they want to pay me 7 figures to sit around and vibe code things, I'll do that too. And so those are kind of your two options. And so finding people who want to join your team is a big part of those that we've recruited. Is they believe in the mission that we have, right? They could go do anything, right? Like, we just had 2 new executives join this week. They could go do anything, like literally, like they were joking about the job offers that they got like while we were at lunch yesterday. Like, literally the job offer came in via text, like,
Yeah.
hey, I hope it's okay that I had your number, I'm recruiting you for this. And they're like, oh gosh, those people again, right?
Yeah.
I know that people are going to try to recruit my team, but we are all so aligned around this problem that we're trying to solve and this mission that we're trying to build towards. And the fact that it's also a really, really great company, and has a lot of different ways that we could build for a future exit. That is is an advantage that I'm really grateful to have right now, because I don't know that I'd be able to recruit the talent that I've been able to recruit if it didn't have that mission driven component to like truly solving a problem that helps real people in this world.
Well, and as you're saying that, I'm just thinking about my companies that I have. Obviously, I'm in property management, so there's a core thing to try to solve homelessness. But what happens if you're listening to this podcast and the widget that you've invented doesn't really inspire anybody? Now, what do you do, right? Because or are you saying find a mission if you truly want to attract an A player?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more mandatory. The ability to go from 0% proficiency to 80% proficiency in something is the same order of magnitude of skill that it takes to go from 80% to 90%, and to go to 90 from 95%, and from 95 to 98, right? And 98 to 99 is
Yeah.
it's as hard to do each of those next jumps. And A players want challenges that give them the chance to level up again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the best players, the best talent that's out there right now is looking for really, really hard problems to solve, because a lot of the easy stuff has been solved, right? Like
Yeah.
I love people who made email more efficient for me, but man, I could not get out of bed in the morning to make email efficient, right? That like that for me is not a mission that I could,
Yeah.
spend my life working on. And
You're, you're
I'm
not you're
grateful.
not lying awake at night going, how can I make email more efficient for people?
Yeah, yeah. But I think that but I think there's an opportunity, right, for people who, to take a look at what they're currently doing and saying, hey, is this the highest and best use in 2026 of my time, talent, and treasures? Right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I could do anything. Is this the thing that I want to spend even one more day doing?
Because
And if
life's
it's
too short.
not,
Yeah.
you don't have to quit immediately, but you do have to start doing the work to think about, if I wasn't doing this and I could choose to eradicate any problem from this world, what would I spend my time doing? Great. Now, how does the thing that I'm doing today, the skills that I have today, the network I have today, attach to that problem, to that challenge that I realize is the thing that I might be on this earth to do? Right? Start that work while you still have a paycheck. Start that work while you're, still in a position where, you can make some moves. And if you can solve that problem while you still have your day job, like, congratulations, that's amazing, right? There's a lot of things that you can do nights and weekends, with AI and having agents run while you're at work, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think there are too many things that are still wrong in this world, and they feel like more and more of them show up every single day, that we all need to be working towards solutions for. And I really hope that, A players and talented people and people with great networks start to step more into taking that responsibility, because it takes all of us in order for any of this to change.
I have a very key manager that's been with me for about 5, 6 years. And I'm sure you have one on your team as well, but he started with me just as an assistant. Like, we're talking a resume that's like, I'm just like, why are you applying to this? Right. And he gave me the stock. Well, I want to work through the company and know everything. And I want to be able to run the place one day. Well, he eventually started running the place one day. But what he said to me is something that I think what you're talking about, Andy, is he said, Garrett, you're not giving me financial compensation, which you are. I'm getting emotional compensation here.
Mm.
And he said a lot of A players go for the emotional compensation versus the financial compensation. So I think that's what you're talking about.
I think that's really well said. Really well
Yeah.
said.
All right. Final question before we wrap up. I always ask every guest this question. So, Andy, this is the Investing to Win podcast. How do you define success, and what does winning look like for you?
The definition of wealth that I have come back to over and over again is optionality. Whoever has the most options is the wealthiest person in the room. And I don't mean options, like stock options. I mean like choices for
Right.
what you
Right.
can choose to do next. And this was derived some from, some of my private jet clients. They didn't, to your point about, billionaires on Instagram, right? They weren't flying private so they could take a selfie and show people that they were rich,
Right.
right? They were flying private because it meant that if a tea time opened up at Pebble Beach and they got a text message while they were at dinner tonight, they could have the jet waiting for them and make it for the 6 a.m. tea time tomorrow. They don't have to they don't have to try and get on an American flight and then, make it to the
Right.
airport and then drive. Like they could literally fly to
Or
that
be at
airport
home for their family because they took a
and
key
then
meeting in another state. Right.
100%, right? It gave them options. That was what, the private jet offered to them. But I started to think about that like at every stage of life, right? If you are a high school student and you make making really good grades and you're involved in, the right programs, you're going to get into more colleges, and so you're going to have more options, and you can choose what your next path is. You don't have to just go to the one place that you got into, right? And if in college you are doing well with your grades and you're, doing well with your internships, you're going to have more first job offers, right? And after your first job, if you do a good job, you will be wealthy when more people recruit you when it's time for you to move on to what's next. And for me in the startup game, I've raised a couple rounds of funding for Stretch, and I did it with zero cold calls, right? No cold emails, right? I
Mm.
just reached out to people in my network that I've been cultivating over the past 15 years. I had options. And and some of those people that I reached out to, they then introduced me to other investors who said, "Oh my gosh, like you got to see what Andy's building. Check this out," right? And the compliment was paid, right?
Hmm.
So for me, everything that I try and do is if I'm debating whether I'm going to make this decision or not, the question that kind of runs through my head is, does it give me more options than I have right now or less? And if it gives me more options, then it's probably the direction that I'm going to go.
Love it. No, I've always told my wife that the more options you have, the less stress you have. Right? Oh, I have you hear this. Oh, I have no choice. Well, if you have more choices to quit your job, keep your job, jump off into entrepreneurial journey, whatever it is,
Yep.
then very, very well said. Very, very well
Yeah.
said.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's been a great hour. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Very enjoyable. I love your story, and I hope that people, well, obviously put your information about Stretch in. And best of luck with the startup. I think you guys
Yeah.
are going to do great.
I appreciate that, Garrett. No, thanks so much for having me on, and really, really enjoyed this conversation.
All right. Thank you.